Massachusetts is making history again in the efforts to eliminate pay discrimination. The new Pay Equity Act signed by Governor Charlie Baker carry big provisions that promises changes in the workplace. So believe it or not, women still face discrimination in workplaces. For every single dollar that a man earns, on average a woman gets 80% of that. And if you take race into account, women of color get a lesser percentage than that. To talk more on pay discrimination, I took a little field trip to visit Senator Patricia G. Helen at the State House. While trying to put this bill together, what were some of the reasons coming from employers on why women were paid less?
Oh, they didn't agree that that was true.
So
They said, they said that they didn't do it. But that there are reasons that over your lifetime, women are more likely to take time off to raise a family or for other reasons. People say women choose to work in low-paid professions. Men choose to work in high-paid professions.
but that's not what's debatable here. Debatable here is that people working in the same workplace doing the same job.
When people look at that women are paid 79 cents on the dollar, they say it must be those other reasons.
Also job marketing.
There are jobs that are perceived as female and jobs that are perceived as male, and I always compare. We don't pay people who work in daycare or elder care as much as we pay people who care for our cars. I don't think we value our children or our parents less than we value our automobiles, but we pay the people that care for them differently. And I think until we begin to value the work that's been perceived as women's work, we're going to have inequality.
So you're probably asking yourself, am I a victim of pay discrimination? To share some light into the matter, here is Sasha Goodfriend, the co-president of Massachusetts National Organization for Women in Boston, talking to me at Simmons College.
What are these jobs that are underpaying women?
It's every single industry. There's a pay gap in every single industry. You might see these pay gaps more in the tech and STEM industries, for example, where women already have a lot more barriers to entering the industries, but you also see it in the restaurant industry. One population that I think is important to bring up now especially are tipped workers. Tipped workers are paid only $3.21, and they rely on customers who are making up their minds based on lots of different factors, including how they woke up that day, to compensate for the rest of their salary. And 70% of tipped workers are women. So you see that this issue is even exacerbated for low-income women and women of color.
In the fight to end pay discrimination, women and advocates for women's rights have been asking themselves this question. Why should women be paid less than their male co-workers while doing comparable work?
So Mass Now had been working in a coalition on an equal pay bill since 1998, when the Supreme Court ruled that the pre-existing equal pay law from the 40s did not have a definition of comparable work, and so that meant that the law wasn't effective.
Defining comparable work is not the only thing that the new Pay Equity Act has successfully done.
But as we learned from other people, we added other parts that would allow ways, it would reduce barriers to women getting equal pay. One is to allow require transparency in salary. So some companies have forbid people to talk about their salaries with other employees. So when people can talk about it, that reduces a barrier to equality.
So what the senator is talking here is pay secrecy. Pay secrecy is when your employer tells you that you cannot discuss your pay with your fellow employees. This deprives you from collective bargaining, negotiating your pay, but most importantly, this deprives you from realizing if you're being taken advantage of. The new pay equity also outlaws pay history, the need for an employer to ask you what you used to make in the past.
It prevents employers from asking potential candidates their previous salary history. So what happens often is that a candidate is not hired and then they decide, oh, because you're a woman, we're going to pay you less. They sometimes say, oh, what were you paid in your previous job? And what you were paid in your previous job should not determine what you get paid in your current job, because people should be getting paid for comparable work in the same position. And so what happens is that when a woman or anyone is underpaid in a previous job, that can follow her throughout her entire career and add up over a lifetime.
I mean, this pay inequality, this entire battle isn't just about gender, but it is also about race. So how are we going to tackle the race factor in that?
That's a really good question. So I think this bill will be good for everyone across races because it's asking employers to look at a specific set of standards for what comparable work means. I think more education needs to be done in terms of asking ourselves, how did these circumstances happen in the first place? And so...
And the other thing is changing the behavior of women and people of color. That Boston has been running workshops to teach women to negotiate. So many of the women who go have never tried to negotiate. So I think I personally am often in the situation of saying thank you when I get an opportunity to advance, and I just say thank you. Not very, I think women in particular, probably a lot of people, are reluctant to question when they get a job offer. But learning how to advocate for yourself, I think, will be important.
You spoke about the educational factor.
Yeah.
And first of all, to be aware that you're being taken advantage of. As a candidate, you're going to seek for a job. You can no longer post that how much was your salary previously. They cannot ask you about it. But how would you know that you've been taken advantage of?
So one of the panelists that we have when we do educational panels around the equal pay law is exactly to address this question. So there is a method to the madness in terms of how compensation is assigned. And so you can go to salary.com or Glassdoor, Google online, look up your position and your area, because of course salary is commensurate with living wages often wherever you are, and how much experience you have. And it will tell you a range based on aggregate data of how much you should be paid. And so a lot of times people are surprised because that number is a lot higher than what they're making. And that means that they should ask their employer to do a market-based research if they haven't done one already, because there's data that can be found out there that talks about averages.
Why do you think it has taken us this long? I mean, just the Massachusetts bill from 1945 to now 2017, and it should be enacted next year, 2018. Like 73 years. Why has it taken us that long?
That's a really good question. And I think that there's a lot of reasons. One, perhaps, is the representation of women in the legislature and in the business community in general. If women are not around the table, so to speak, in the Senate or in the House or in the board of directors conversation, then this issue may not come up. So I think that definitely having more women in power and in positions of leadership is helpful to having women's issues be talked about as an issue that affects everyone.
So just to recoup, the new pay equity has outlawed pay history, pay secrecy, and successfully defined what comparable work means. Sounds pretty good, right? So how confident are you about this new bill? That it's going to make the change?
I think it will make a difference. I think it is making a difference.
I'm confident that this bill is going to make progress. I don't think that overnight we're going to see the wage gap close entirely, of course, but I think we're going to see it close dramatically.
So what now? Are we to see it and wait until next year? What are things that we can do, grassroots movements that we can do that to make sure by next year we are all fully prepared and that we are going forward instead of maybe a few years from now finding ourselves in the same place, hosting the same conversation?
That's a really good question. And I think it depends on where you are. One is you can just talk about it. Talk about it at home with your friends, with your family, over dinner. Ask them if they've heard about this new law and they know their rights, right? I think that's one part that's really important. Also, of course, you can talk about it with your coworkers in the workplace, even if that's awkward. I think that's part of one of the cultural barriers that we do need to get over. And if you want, you can reach out to the Equal Pay Coalition or Mass Now, and we'll bring a workshop to your workplace, to your group of friends, and tell you how to have this conversation with your supervisor.
But I think a big piece of it is also looking at our whole culture and looking at the jobs that we don't pay enough for people to live on, even though people are living on them and trying to live on them and working 2 or 3 jobs and trying to raise a family at the same time. So I think looking at our whole economy and whether it's one that will support workers and their families, this is part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. The new law is to take into effect next year, June 2018. Thank you so much for joining me in this program. From WCTV, I am Queen Banda.